Hour. First, we're bringing you updates from Ukraine, where the Prime Minister is beginning a historic visit. It's the first time in 30 years, the first time since India strengthened its diplomatic relationship with Ukraine, that an Indian Prime Minister is on a visit to Ukraine. The Indian diaspora welcomed the Prime Minister. They raised Bharat Mata Ki Jai slogans as he landed. Later in the day, the Prime Minister will meet the Ukrainian President Zelensky. They'll hold crucial bilateral talks. There is a big question mark on whether or not he'll address the parliament. He has been invited to, but whether or not security protocol allow it does remain a question. Why does the visit hold key significance? It's important because in the backdrop, obviously, of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, in the backdrop of the Prime Minister just meeting with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and with the Ukrainian leader and the US both criticizing that visit, what this visit will mean and what it could potentially do to ties, that obviously remains a big question. Kyiv is obviously highly sensitive right now. We'll continue to bring you different updates. We have reporters joining us live on the ground too. These visuals you can see of the Prime Minister greeting members of the Indian diaspora. We'll just have reporters join us in a second to bring us more context on the visit as it's taking place right now. Now, as we told you a little earlier, there are several key aspects in focus right now. The Prime Minister just landing in Kyiv. And as you can see on your screens, defense and industrial cooperation both will be in major focus during this visit. That's the economics of it all. Remember, the bilateral ties, the economic bilateral ties between both countries have suffered a big hit since the Russia-Ukraine war actually started. Where trade once stood at 3.39 billion, today it stands at 0.71 billion. So the numbers have taken a big hit. We'll have a reporter joining us in just a second to bring us more context with those visuals right now on your screen of the Prime Minister meeting Indians inside Ukraine, Indians who've started living in Ukraine. Remember, during the start of the Ukraine-Russia war, it's these members of the Indian community that housed Indian students, that helped Indian students rush to safety. As you saw in the last few hours, we've seen Indian diplomats repeatedly say thank you to those Indians. We'll go over to our colleague Siddhant. He joins us on the phone right now. Siddhant is in Ukraine right now, bringing us all of these updates. He's in Kyiv, where the Prime Minister is. Siddhant, first off, just walk us through what's planned for the day today.
Well, look, Prime Minister's visit to Kyiv is action-packed, and in fact, he is here in Kyiv for a few hours, but he has back-to-back engagements. So, in some time from now, Prime Minister will leave to pay tribute at Mahatma Gandhi's statue in Kyiv. After which he is going to he will meet President Zelensky and hold talks with President Zelensky. Post that, we could expect press statements by both sides, and after which Prime Minister may or may not go to Ukrainian Parliament, because there is an invitation which has been extended to Prime Minister by the Member of Parliament of Ukraine, inviting him to address the Ukrainian Parliament. But we don't have any confirmation on that whether Prime Minister will go or not, given security protocols. Early afternoon, Prime Minister will depart from Kyiv. So it's a very short visit. A few hours, Prime Minister would be here in Kyiv, and it's an action-packed day for Prime Minister Modi.
Okay, Siddhant, stay with us. Let's go over to our colleague Sanjay Suri. He's with us right now, live from London. Sanjay, can you tell our audiences, in the initial years after independence, the many decades after, India's diplomatic efforts essentially focused on the big four in Europe. It's only recently, over the last few years, that we've seen that effort open up to countries like Ukraine, Poland, that we're seeing happened right before this. How should we see this entire trip? What's the symbolism at play?
Well, certainly India will look to build relations with countries outside of the US and Western Europe. Those have been traditionally the focus, and we have seen a diversion from that, which of course is as it should be. There was a visit to Poland. We saw earlier a visit also to Austria, and to the extent that India builds relations with these other countries, it can only be to the good, both politically and economically. A lot of trade possibilities exist that have been untapped as of now between India and a lot of these countries, and certainly India could build on those, and not least with Ukraine itself currently. This visit is very substantially about building that kind of bilateral cooperation And this is what the Prime Minister has said. He said that he hopes that this will strengthen bilateral cooperation. He said that this should strengthen ties between the two countries or to be strengthened over years ahead. And he also said that he and Zelensky would share perspectives on a peaceful resolution. So really quite a cautious statement from none other than the Prime Minister himself on where this may go towards a building or taking some steps at least towards an eventual peace. But really this is about bilateral cooperation primarily, not just now with Ukraine or Poland or Austria, but certainly India should spread that net wider and build more active cooperation with many other countries in Europe.
Sanjay, stay with us. Let's just go over to a guest we have joining us. Rajiv Dogra is with us. He's a former diplomat. Sir, thank you for joining us here on CNN News 18. Sir, we're just highlighting for our audiences the immense history of this visit. For the first time since the modern formation of Ukraine as it is, we're seeing an Indian Prime Minister visiting its soil. I just want to ask you, we've been discussing this through the day today, that big question, can India broker peace between Russia and Ukraine? That's been the headline in newspaper articles across the world. But just tell us, what's a realistic expectation from this visit?
Well, I'm glad you added the adjective realistic, because the realistic expectation from the visit is that when Western leaders are shying away from visiting Ukraine for a variety of reasons, first being their personal safety, because missiles are flying all over the place every day, perhaps every other hour. The second is that Western leaders are themselves instigating some of this fighting, the escalation and fighting. There are reports this morning that America has allowed Ukraine to use its equipment, its armament, for strikes within Russia. Now that is not a very welcome step towards peace. So the expectations from the visit to be on a realistic scale is, number one, that at a time when West had given up, Prime Minister Modi has decided to take a bold step, firstly by visiting Ukraine at this moment, secondly by trying to convince Zelensky that he should tone down his rhetoric against Putin personally, and his sort of belief that peace is far away, because there have been calls from Russian side that let's sit together and talk about possibilities of peace, but he has rejected it all the time. Second thing, another thing is that whatever happens, Ukrainians are going to suffer just as Russians are going to suffer. So it is for the two of them to decide whether they want to continue down the path of fight, or can they have some kind of a war, some kind of a beginning. And that is what is the significance of Mr. Modi's visit. He's been to Russia, he's now coming to Ukraine. He'll convey the same message as he conveyed to Putin twice. And I think that is a very bold step by itself. No other leader would have had the guts to sit with Putin and say that this is not the age of war, and say it twice over. So I hope he says the same thing to Zelensky, and let's see how it goes from there.
Okay, Mr. Dogra, we'll ask you to stay with us. Let's go back to our colleague Sanjay Suri to understand more. Sanjay, can you just highlight for our audiences some of the economics at play? I just want to tell our audiences, there was a point just a few years ago where India and Ukraine, the trade, it stood at $3.39 billion. It's come down right now to $0.71 billion. There's been a clear decimation over there. Where does it stand right now, and what is hoped in that context from this visit?
Well, the situation in Ukraine is certainly far from normal. There has been a lot of exchange traditionally. There has been a grain basket, really, that is the title given to Ukraine, certainly for Europe. There has been a lot of exchange in IT, and some of that has shifted away. So this is not a situation where anyone really can go and do business normally in Ukraine at all. You just never know what's going to be hit by a missile, where all of Ukraine is a danger zone. in this situation, it's not just India, it is trade between Ukraine and the rest of the world that has suffered. Nobody is going to be investing in Ukraine in this environment, and therefore this is an Indian fallout of the broader and the wider situation. But really, the Prime Minister has emphasized that he will use this visit and he intends to use this visit to build bilateral cooperation and to strengthen relations between India and Ukraine. Realistically, that is what we can be looking for. And of course, Mr. Dogra, with whom I have interacted very busily for a stretch when he was in London, is quite right to query the word realistic. We really are not looking at a resolution of the conflict by the end of the day, but a step towards discussion and dialogue towards that end can only help, and more specifically, we can look at outcomes bilaterally.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Dogra this follow-up question. Sir, can you tell our audiences, the visit that we saw the Prime Minister make less than 2 months ago to Russia, the visuals that we were all playing on our channels of Putin and the Prime Minister hand in hand, there was great bonhomie there. I just want to ask, can that relationship and the strength of it be counted on in moments like this to mean that we won't see any statement coming in from Russia about this visit?
Well, firstly, it's good to see Sanjay after so many years. He's looking younger. Well, you know, Russia and President Putin, whatever West might say about him, they might demonize him and so on, but having interacted with him a number of times when I was looking after relations with Russia, and having assessed his policies, especially in this trying period, I think he's not the type who would be provoked into issuing statements just because Mr. Modi is visiting Ukraine. In fact, he would consider very carefully and very seriously as to the results of the visit, and if it represents a movement forward, at least towards a dialogue. After all, if Israel and Hamas can have a dialogue through third parties or whatever, why can't Russia and Ukraine have a dialogue? Whether along with India or some other country, that's a different thing. But a step towards dialogue means reduction in the injuries, killings, and destruction of civilians and their property. So who can object to that? And I don't think Mr. Putin is going to object to that, or his representatives or officers in Russia are going to object to that. Nor should any serious-minded, balanced person in rest of the world object to that. Certainly not in Global South. So if Mr. Modi's visit and his interaction with Zelensky leads to a step forward, so much the better.
Okay, Mr. Dogra, can I ask you to stay with us? Sanjay, can I also ask you to stay with us? We're just going to head into more reactions. We'll come back to both of you in a second.
मैंने मोदी जी को बोला कि मोदी जी यूक्रेन आपका इंतजार कर रहा है, तो मोदी जी ने इस पे जवाब दिया कि अब मैं आ गया। तो हम लोगों को बहुत ही शांति मिली कि जिस पर्पज से मोदी जी आए हैं यहाँ पे, शायद उसको हल करने में कुछ न कुछ तो मदद जरूर मिली। नहीं, मैंने उनको यही बोला कि सब लोग बोल ही रहे थे, लेकिन मैंने ये बोला कि मोदी जी यूक्रेन आपका इंतजार कर रहा है। मोदी जी समझ गए कि किस पर्पज से मैं बोल रहा हूँ। तो मोदी जी बोले कि अब मैं आ गया हूँ, सब ठीक हो जाएगा।
Let's just go over to our colleague Sanjay. Sanjay, just lay out a bit of a timeline for us here, and this is going to need you to take us back a few months. Can you just tell us, right from the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the role that India has played, because this question of whether or not India can be the mediator, whether or not the shoe fits, this comes up every few months. Just walk us through the timeline. Other countries that may have had more success within that mediation conversation between the two countries?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because at the very outset of this invasion, India said very clearly that it supports territorial integrity, that it supports a resolution within terms of the UN Charter. Now, that very clearly and very specifically and unambiguously means that India by no means endorsed or supported this invasion. It in fact was critical of it, and that has been a position India took at the outset, and that is a position India has maintained. What India has not done is to use some of the strident language we've heard in other countries and go along with the sanctions regime as set out and as implemented to an extent by a number of countries, or joined the UN resolutions condemning Russia. We do need to bear in mind with sanctions that there has been some criticism of India getting cheap oil from Russia. We do have to bear in mind that this is not just oil coming to India, this is oil going through India, and it is going to many of the countries in Western Europe and NATO members who are taking a position politically on the side of Ukraine. We also need to keep in mind that this position with oil has done a great deal to stabilize global prices. So this is not a criticism that really is one-dimensional, that India necessarily should feel too defensive about. That has been India's position from the beginning, and that has been India's position in relations to sanctions and particularly the oil imports. And now India is looking to play the role of peacemaker. That did not go down very well when the Prime Minister visited Moscow just some weeks back. The day he visited Moscow is the day that Russia launched a very, very big attack on Ukraine that killed a number of people, including a number of children. This was really, in terms of timing, very unfortunate for India. The fact that India has relations with Russia is no surprise to anyone, but the optics of it and the timing of the optics was a problem. It was a time when the Prime Minister was seen admiring horses with Putin when children were dying in Ukraine, and that led to a very strong reaction from Zelensky that we heard. And this visit will look to calm some of that down, to repair some of that damage and build relations bilaterally.
I'll just ask you, Sanjay, to stay with us. Thank you for taking us through that timeline. Mr. Dogra, stay with us too. We'll just play out more reactions, then we'll come back to you.
प्रधानमंत्री मोदी आने वाले हैं यूक्रेन में, कितना बड़ा मौका है भारतीय समुदाय के लिए। और लंबे अरसे तक भारतीय समुदाय को एक, जैसे कहते हैं ना, सस्पिशन की नज़र से देखा जाता रहा कि भाई आप रशिया से तेल खरीदते हैं, आप रशिया के दोस्त हैं। क्या लग रहा है कि जो नैरेटिव है, जो परसेप्शन है, वो हमेशा के लिए बदलेगा?
जी बिल्कुल ये बदलेगा। द प्रॉब्लम इज़, हमारा प्रॉब्लम यही रहा है कि यहाँ पे हमें यहाँ के लोगों को यहाँ का इन्फॉर्मेशन, यहाँ का मीडिया सिर्फ यही बता रहा है जो वो दिखाना चाहते हैं। जैसे यूरोपियन प्रोपेगेंडा है कि भाई इंडिया जो है रशिया से ऑयल खरीद रहा है, बट हमारी आवाज़ जो है यहाँ की जनता तक नहीं पहुँचती। आई थिंक दिस इज़ अ बेस्ट मोमेंट जो यहाँ के लोग जान सकेंगे कि भारत का क्या दृष्टिकोण है इस क्राइसिस के लिए। और आई थिंक दिस इज़ वन ऑफ द बेस्ट टाइम टू विजिट हियर। और आई थिंक मिस्टर मोदी के ये प्रयत्न से आई थिंक हिस्ट्री विल बी चेंज।
ये विज़िट बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है और वी आर सीइंग दिस विज़िट एज ए गेम चेंजर फॉर यूक्रेन, क्योंकि हम लोग पीस चाहते हैं यहाँ पर, और पीस के लिए ही मोदी जी यहाँ पर आए हैं। हम सब के लिए भी बहुत बढ़िया रहेगा, क्योंकि हम सब भारतीय भी पीस चाहते हैं और हम कभी भी लड़ाई के अंदर विश्वास नहीं रखते।
Everybody is very much excited. We have got so many hopes that a ray of light has come that is going to put stop to this war.
Okay, let's go back to Mr. Dogra. Mr. Dogra, can we ask you now to take us behind the scenes? There is obviously what we can see, the statements countries put out and the statements countries don't put out. What happens behind the scenes? And there I want to ask you, sir, the Prime Minister's visit to Russia came, as we were just discussing, as Sanjay was pointing out right now, a few hours after that missile attack on a children's hospital in Ukraine. Did that put the Indian diplomatic side in a sticky spot at all?
No, I'm sorry to take a different line than Sanjay. But let's consider the international scenario. Isn't Israel wiping schools and hospitals off the Gaza earth? Isn't it happening every other week, if not even more frequently? Has West issued even a single statement condemning it? So, Mr. Modi being in Russia at a time when a missile happened to hit a school or a hospital, or, any place associated with children, is not Mr. Modi's design, nor I think it was Mr. Putin's design. After all, when missiles are flying, they need not be with pinpoint accuracy. They can also be misdirected. So to make a big thing out of something which unfortunately happened, which India condemned, which Mr. Modi condemned while he was in Russia, was just Western opportunity to pin India down at a time when it should not have. Because Mr. Modi's visit to Russia, as he explained publicly also once again, was to take a step forward towards peace and to associate Mr. Putin with it. So, but West thought it was a great opportunity to press India in a corner and to make it visit Ukraine so that their pressure works. So it was Western propaganda, and I think we should not be taken in by that. I would be looking forward to seeing West criticize Israel every time a Palestinian child is killed. That has not happened, and that is not going to happen.
Mr. Dogra, thank you. Thank you for highlighting what's taking place behind the scenes. Thank you for bringing us your perspective. Okay, we keep a keen eye on all of the developments in Ukraine. We'll keep having our colleague Siddhant, who's actually on the ground in Kyiv right now, where the Prime Minister is. We'll keep connecting with him to bring you updates, right?